السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هي شهادة بالصوت والصورة على كرامة وصلابة الشعب الفلسطيني وجذوره العميقة ونضاله من أجل التحرير، ورسالة إلى الأجيال الفلسطينية اليافعة. هو فيلم وثائقي يؤرخ حقبة الثورة الفلسطينية في السبعينيات من القرن الماضي. مع مخرجة الفيلم الألمانية مونيكا ماورير نتحدث عن الالتزام بتوثيق تلك المرحلة وأهميتها من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعوا. هو شهادة على كرامة وقوة وجلد الشعب الفلسطيني وجذوره العميقة. هو الفيلم الوثائقي تصوير الثورة للمخرجة الألمانية مونيكا ماورير من أعمدة السينما النضالية التي قدمت إلى لبنان في السبعينيات وصممت على الانخراط مباشرة في الحركة السينمائية المقاومة التي أرستها وحدة أفلام فلسطين التابعة لمنظمة التحرير.
هذه الثورة ليست بندقية فقط،
جنين دولة مستقبلية. هذه البنى التحتية الاجتماعية الهائلة من المؤسسات الصحية والثقافية والاجتماعية والرياضية والتعليمية كانت الموضوع الرئيسي لعملها مع الوحدة، ولعل هذه البنى التحتية هي بالضبط ما عزمت على تدميره إسرائيل عام 82، حيث أراد الصهاينة تصفية الفلسطينيين جسديا وإزالة أثر منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية من لبنان آنذاك. من هنا عملت الاستراتيجية الإسرائيلية بمختلف أذرعها على محو واجتثاث الشعب الفلسطيني ومسح ذاكرته وتقطيع جذوره ونسف هويته الثقافية والقومية.
يا فلسطين مالك.
وفي الواقع هذا السبب بالتحديد هو الذي دفع مونيكا ماورير إلى السعي الحثيث رغم كل المخاطر والعراقيل ومحاولات الطمس إلى الحفاظ على التاريخ الشفوي والشهادة السمعية والبصرية لهذه الحقبة من الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي عبر رقمنة أكثر من 100 ساعة مصورة من الأفلام التي صنعت بكاميرا 16 ملم كي يراها الفلسطينيون الشبان اليوم ضمن العمل التوثيقي الجديد تصوير الثورة. مونيكا ماورير الكاتبة وصانعة أفلام النضال الفلسطيني تحدثنا كيف انخرطت بالعمل مع وحدة أفلام فلسطين في السبعينيات، وكيف تقارن ما بين صناعة السينما حينها وحاضرها اليوم. Militant writer and filmmaker Monica Maurer, welcome to الداخل from the inside, ma'am. Always welcome. Always welcome, ma'am. Well, Monica, you are a German filmmaker who worked with the Palestine Liberation Organization's Palestine Film Unit in Lebanon in the 1970s. My question here is, how did you develop this sense of awareness of the injustices, the oppression and the persecution of the Palestinians, especially as a German? And usually the Germans are, to a certain extent, apologetic regarding Israel.
Well, it's a long story, but it started long before I worked as a filmmaker with the Palestinian Cinema Institution, which I got to know through the first contacts with the film unit was in the Leipzig Documentary Film Festival, where I went several times with films. And it was a really much earlier that I came into contact with the Palestinian people. Being a German, I had contacts with the immigrant workers, which you know, Germany after the post-war, they needed workforce to build up again. And they imported, so to say, work labor from outside. Now, there were many Italians, Greek, Spanish, and also Palestinians, who were the most organized through the Palestinian Workers' Union component in the what we then call the Industrial Reserve Army. That means the workers, immigrant workers, who obviously had the the less paid and the most exploited jobs. Now, in the '67 war, when the '67 war happened, there was a kind of hysteria in Germany, pro-Israeli hysteria. But I saw the '67 war not through the media, but through the eyes of these families I knew. So it was a quite different.
This is the point that
this
I wanted
was
to underscore.
the beginning of my engagement with the Palestinian people.
But regarding,
but before that,
yes,
there is another key experience in my life, which is the Algerian Revolution. When I was very, very young, there was. Besides school, I went to the art academy. I always have a, not very long, but anyway, a career as a painter, and I financed my studies with my paintings. There were many exiles from different countries, oppressive. Some of them were Algerian. And when through a demonstration against torture in that the French opposed on the Algerian, I participated, and I was clubbed for the first time and busted for the first time. And so this is why I understood that you can't stay in between. You have to choose sides.
Yes.
And that's the
you
beginning
understood the
of
persecution of those two peoples, so to say.
That was the beginning of a political consciousness and a principle.
Allow me to ask you, Monica, how long have you worked for the Palestine Film Unit, and how did you become involved with them?
Well, I worked with them since the end 77, 78 to 82 in Beirut. The Palestinian Film Unit was formed in the late 60s in Jordan, and then when after September 70, it became the Palestinian Cinema Institution in Beirut.
In Beirut, yes.
And as I said before, the filmmakers and films of the Palestinian Cinema Institution I had seen and known in the Leipzig Documentary Film Festival, which was the most important festival for documentaries at that time. And I came to Lebanon the first time when in the cadre of a this medical solidarity with the Hilal Ahmar Filistini.
Yes. Palestinian community for the Red Cross.
During the civil war. And I got to know the incredibly differentiated and developed infrastructure of the public health system that the PLO had put on the place. And so I felt that it was necessary to show that, because nobody, even Palestinians in the diaspora, didn't know what an incredible engagement there was on the ground to build infrastructures in the medical and public health, preventive medicine,
education,
social, educational, cultural,
yes.
And so I made it a.
How many films have you made?
8. 8 on the Palestinian cause, but up to 6 up to 82.
Yes, we will talk in details about the films, the various films that you have made in this sense. But allow me to ask you about your most recent production, which is a film with the working title Shooting Revolution, which revisits the Palestinian Revolution's heyday. It was
the movie that you have been working on for a period of time. Why were you keen on recording the Palestinian revolution? Tell us more about the mental, political, ideological framework for this work on memory.
Yeah, first of all, it's not finished, this film. What I presented, it is a work in progress, and it is a, let's say, the umbrella under which I'm digitizing my film archive. I mean, I have between 77 and 82. It was the conviction that particularly since the Palestinian archive had been bombarded
in 1982.
In 1982.
And its fate is still unknown.
And it is still unknown where all the material went. So it is my conviction that it is my, if you want, duty or responsibility to, that this audiovisual testimony or record of those years, which definitely were a golden page in the history of the Palestinian diaspora in Lebanon. They were years of building, years of hope, years of a project of social change of Lebanon. And that the revolution, as Abu Ammar says in the opening of the material I left for you, the revolution is not only a gun. It is a writer's pen, it is a surgeon's scalpel, it's a farmer's plow, and so, I mean, that all
and it's a camera, too.
And it is a camera, too,
yes.
of course. So, I kept all this, this material. I mean, I made the films, but all the rushes filmed for the films, it comes up to 90 hours almost, yeah. And so I kept all this material for over 30 years, because I hope that one day there would be a Palestinian National Archive, and to give all this into the stock of a Palestinian archive. Now, until now, there are
around 33?
Yeah, it's maybe on the way, but in my lifetime, I want to digitize everything.
Yeah.
And
we will talk more about, we will detail about your films that you have produced and worked on here in Lebanon, and to talk also about the process of digitizing those reels, but allow us to stop for a short break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا.
مونيكا ماورير المخرجة الألمانية وصانعة أفلام النضال الفلسطيني تخبرنا إلى أي حد يبين هذا الإنتاج السينمائي التوثيقي عمق تاريخ صناعة الأفلام الفلسطينية ودوره في تشكيل الهوية الفلسطينية، وإلى أي حد يلهم الروح الثورية.
In these years, in the 70s, obviously, there was a concept that the PLO was the National Liberation Movement, and that it also, apart from liberating the homeland of occupation, the aim was to build, if you want, an embryo, a basis of a society just and dignified. And so the important thing then was that all the people felt part of this process, that there was a high degree of participation. And this is what I would say is the definition of a revolutionary process, yeah?
Exactly.
That it is carried by the masses, and that it aggregates the energies of all the people. Yeah? And that was particularly also the case for the women, you know. I mean, the fact that then 60-70% of the women worked. In that sense, the Palestinian society at that time was a pilot in the Arab world. This is obviously not so today. I mean, all these infrastructures were destroyed in '82, and that was, as you said, okay, you referred it to the cinema, but I mean, all this process shaped the Palestinian identity. And this is exactly the target of the Israelis, is
to abolish this identity.
To undermine the identity,
to obliterate, to
in order to change the writing of the history. I mean, to try of abolishing the consciousness of the civilization, of this history, of the culture of the Palestinians, and so
the heritage of the Palestinians.
The heritage, of course. And this is why I feel it's very, very important that the testimony of these moments of construction and of creative energy that there was, is documented.
This is what, Mounika, you attempted to show in all of the films that you have produced and worked on in Lebanon, to talk about this social infrastructure, which was marvelous back then.
Because that's what incited most on the on the whole society as a society in progress.
And it was a kind of message to the youth of today.
Absolutely.
To understand and comprehend and digest what was going on back then. Because, you know, as you said, one of the aims of the Israelis is to obliterate, to abolish, to uproot the culture and the history and the heritage of the Palestinians, so that and wipe it out, in a sense that this new generation is detached from who they are.
Absolutely. Not to know their own roots means that you lack the elements to build a future. And this is why I feel that it is so important to deliver to the new generation this testimony, audiovisual testimony, or of times that they don't know, and that, as a matter of fact, often have a very negative narration of that. And this is why this project, Shooting Revolution, tries to, I mean, this is, as I said, the umbrella. I mean, I use the film, in order to digitize as many materials, many sequences, as many rushes of the films as possible.
Right. Allow me to here quote an observer saying that the period between 1948 and 1967, Palestinians were lacking visibility. This is how the A describes the Palestinians. 1948 was a moment of invisibility, not occupation. It was a complete disappearance. For someone who is invisible, their weapon would be a camera. You know, this audiovisual, the importance of such audiovisual material, particularly now. So the camera became a tool in the struggle for nationhood, a way for Palestinians to show the realities of the struggle and to take control of their own image, one that was being torn apart by Israel's systematic erasure of a culture and people. How do you compare and contrast, Mounika, between, you know, those days back in the 70s and today, for example?
Well, obviously there is
the status.
There's an abyss between a time where there was a project, a collective project, and an aim and a strategy, and
let's talk about the cinema-wise.
But I mean, we must not forget that times have changed everywhere. I mean, between the 60s, 70s and today, there's an abyss anywhere. I mean, the global situation has changed in a way that
the heydays no longer exist.
Well, that does not mean that one cannot learn or cherish some of the elements of then. And that's that's a process to which I try to contribute.
What about the cinema making back then
Well,
and
then,
today when it comes vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause?
Well, in this time, the possibilities for the Palestinians under occupation to make cinema were minimum. As a matter of fact, it is in 1980 that Michel Khleifi, one of the let's say fathers of the newer generation. No? Yes. I mean, there is an old some Palestinians who made cinema, but not as Palestinian cinema, but as part of the Arab cinema. Then the Palestinian cinema history, apart from this militant filmmaking in the 70s, which stressed mainly on the military struggle, and this is why I tried to be complementary, talking about the social struggle. Then the second generation is Michel Khleifi, Mai Masri, who then started Elias Suleiman, and then Rashid Mashrawi, and then the third generation, the younger generation, let's say post Oslo, or with Oslo, is that also had different kinds of means of production.
Exactly. Now, Monica, noteworthy that all your films won several awards and participated in a number of international film festivals. Let's, let me just say the titles of each film, and I want you to tell me briefly about the one which is the dearest to you and why. The first one is Palestine Red Crescent, and then you have Children of Palestine, The Fifth War, Why, Ashbal, War Lab, Palestine in Flames, and Born Out of Death.
Yes.
Which one is the dearest to you? I know they are all so dear, but which one regarding the script perhaps and the story?
Well, the one that is maybe the most immediate and outcry is Born Out of Death. Each of the others, they have a mission, if you want. I mean, I was always very clear about what the subject is, to whom it talks, and how it should be used. It's cinema making for me was always a tool for political action. Yeah. But in order to be a good tool, you have to have the highest possible quality.
Militant writer and filmmaker Monica Maurer, many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Always welcome. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadin.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.